All rise.
The Kosovo Specialist Chambers is now in session.
Be seated. Madam Court Officer, you may call the case.
Morning, Your Honors. This is the file number KC BC 2020-06, the Specialist Prosecutor versus Hashim Thaçi, Kadri Veseli, Recep Selimi, and Jakub Krasnikin. Thank you, Your Honors.
For the record, I note that all the accused are present in court today. Before we continue hearing the evidence of prosecution, witness 4752, I remind everyone that the sitting schedule for this week is adjusted as done last week. W04752 will testify all of Monday until the lunch break on Tuesday, all of Wednesday, and the first session on Thursday. W04051 will testify from the second session and onwards on Thursday. We will now continue hearing the evidence of prosecution witness 4752. Madam Court Usher, please bring the witness in.
Your Honor, before the witness is brought in, I have an issue, if I may raise that before the witness comes in. Your Honor, Mr. Krasniqi was wearing a tie this morning, and that has been removed. If I could be given the reason why that tie has been removed from him this morning, please.
Well, to be real honest, I haven't the slightest idea, but we can find out and we'll let you know.
Yes, Your Honor, the sooner the better, if we can have that information. I'll be grateful. Thank you.
I assume it had something to do with, well, never mind, we'll find out.
For the record, Your Honor, he has worn that tie before to court, so if we could be given the reasons as to why it was removed, I'll be very grateful.
I will attempt
Thank
to
you.
find out. You may bring the witness in now. Good morning, witness. Mr. Zarapi, we're glad to have you back.
Mirman Jesse.
Good morning.
I want to remind you to please try to answer the questions clearly with short sentences. If you don't understand a question, feel free to ask counsel to clarify or to repeat, and they will do so. Also, please try to indicate the basis of your knowledge of facts and circumstances upon which you will testify. Please also speak into the microphone and wait 5 seconds before answering a question, and then speak at a slow pace to allow the interpreters to catch up. If you feel the need to take breaks, please make an indication and we will accommodate you. I remind you that you are still under an obligation to tell the truth, as stated by you in your solemn declaration. I also remind you that, as advised last week, you are not required to answer a question that is incriminating unless and until the panel compels you to answer. And if such a question arises, you or your assigned counsel may raise the issue to the panel, and we will proceed to determine whether or not and under what circumstances you might be compelled to answer. We continue now with the cross-examination. We are still with the Thaçi defense. Please give them your attention. Go ahead, Mr. Misic.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Zarapi.
Mirman Jesse.
Good morning.
Go back to a topic just briefly that we discussed, which was the 6 February 1999 meeting with the zone commanders. You recall that meeting?
Po, takim
Yes, I do recall the meeting.
And if, Mr. Court Officer, if we could please have on the screen P00182 at page 34 in both the English and the Albanian, please. If we could have page 34 in both the English and the Albanian, please. Now, witness, I believe you were shown these portions by the prosecutor last week, but I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions on this. This is, again, the portion of the meeting where I believe Suleiman Salimi is speaking. Sula would be Suleiman Salimi, correct?
Sakt.
That's right.
He says the appointments that have been made in the general staff are a matter of concern. Sokol Bashota and Jakub Krasniqi. I think Sokol Bashota is not up to the job of the deputy commander. The general staff has ignored the requests we have made about this issue. And if we can go to the next page in the English, please. Then it goes on, Jakub Krasniqi too, with all the respect he commands, is not the right man for the post of deputy commander. Now, you confirmed on Thursday that when this meeting was held, the zone commanders knew that Azam Sula was the overall commander. These excerpts also show that the participants in the meeting knew who the deputy commanders were, correct?
A točka dipo.
From what I know, yes.
That if they knew that there were deputy commanders of the KLA, they must have known that there was an overall commander of the KLA at the time of this meeting, correct?
Poštovano.
Yes, that's right.
Turning now to the Rambouillet agreement. Now, we discussed last week that the zone commanders had been opposed to signing the Rambouillet agreement in part because they would lose because of the requirement of the disbandment of the KLA, they would lose their authority. Do you recall that discussion?
Po.
Yes, I do.
The Rambouillet agreement, actually, if we could please put on the screen 1D69, please. As that's coming up, do you recall that part of the way that Mr. Thaçi was able to convince the zone commanders to sign or to agree to the Rambouillet agreement was that they would get to participate in the provisional government and also in a National Guard.
Po.
Yes.
Screen is dated the 23rd of February 1999, which is 3 days before the meeting that the prosecutor discussed with you of the General Staff, where Mr. Thaçi was selected to be the Prime Minister of the Provisional Government. Have you seen this document before?
Jo.
No.
By the 26th of February that an agreement had been signed at Rambouillet by Mr. Thaçi on behalf of the KLA, by Dr. Ibrahim Rugova on behalf of the LDK, and Mr. Recep Chosia on behalf of the LBD to form the Provisional Government of Kosovo, or to establish one with the Rambouillet Agreement.
Nuk e di pa net.
I don't know exactly, but when the delegation returned from Rambouillet, they informed us that such an agreement had been signed indeed.
And were you informed at that time that the LDK was also intended to be part of the Provisional Government?
Po.
Yes.
That the LDK ultimately chose not to participate in the Provisional Government of Kosovo after the NATO bombing campaign began.
Po.
Yes.
Screen, please, DHT 04018 to DHT 04028 at page 5 in the English, and DHT 04022 to DHT 04022 in the Albanian, please. This is a summary of news from the 12th of May, 1999. And if we look in the second paragraph on the English, and the Albanian will be on the screen in a moment. Towards the a few sentences in, it says Kosovo Press yesterday printed an interview with KLA chief Hashim Thaçi, in which Thaçi called for the LDK to participate in a provisional government he formed last month. Quote, "It is in the interests of the LDK to abandon forms of institutional boycott and to respect the agreement that its president signed. It would be in their interest to rise above these dissensions and to make recommendations." Now, were you aware, at this time you're the Assistant Minister of Defense in the Provisional Government, were you aware that Mr. Thaçi had called on the LDK, even though they weren't participating at the time, to continue to try to get them to be part of the Provisional Government?
Po.
Yes, I was.
And I tender this document into evidence.
Could you please give us the ERN on it again?
Yes. It's DHT 04018 to DHT 04028 in the English, and DHT 04022 to DHT 04022 in the Albanian.
That document is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honors. I note that in English it's only one page. It's DHT 04022 to DHT 04022, whereas apologies, this is for the Albanian. For English, we have the range from DHT 04018 to DHT 04028. Should I assign the exhibit number for entire range or for the particular? Thank you, Anas. Therefore, DHT 04018 to DHT 04028 in English and the corresponding Albanian, which is DHT 04022 to DHT 04022, will be assigned exhibit number 1D00168, currently classified as public. Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, Mr. Corps Officer. Now, witness, you testified last week that you were present at the meeting of the General Staff where the Prime Minister of the Provisional Government was chosen, correct?
Njëjti takim kur ka qenë
It is the same meeting we're talking about, the meeting where we were informed about the situation, the same meeting where we were informed about Mr. Thaçi's position and the others.
Exhibit P00645, starting at page 672, which is the second page of the document. Yes, and so beginning at the top where it says Regia, which is Commander Drini, the last bullet point, he's reported to have said, Ramush insists that Suleiman Salimi should be the general commander of the KLA. And then the next speaker is Sokol Bashota, who says, I hope and I wish that this coup has not been planned by UDBA. The information we have is bleak. Do you recall those discussions at this meeting? And let me just finish by then Commander Regia, if we can scroll down in the Albanian, please, which is Commander Drini, says Sula, meaning Suleiman Salimi, has been chosen because he can be manipulated very easily.
Objection, Your Honor, regarding the characterization of who's speaking.
Who is the speaker?
Nuk e di si takim është ky.
I don't know what meeting we're talking about, but it says the so-called Daya. It's a meeting that I did not attend. Maybe it did occur in March, but I'm not sure.
The 26th of February meeting that you said you did attend, and if we go to the next page of the document, that's where it's recorded as to how people voted.
Nëse
And your report,
If
you're undecided but going with the majority. It's the same meeting.
Aha, bravo.
Now, if we can go back to
fine.
who is Regia?
Regia
Regia is the surname of Commander Drimi, but it's Recep Selimi as well we're talking about. I don't know which one. But it is correct that this meeting did occur on the 26th. There were a number of things that were discussed, and I cannot recall everything. It wasn't just us who attended that. The zone commanders were there too. It was a large number of people, to be frank, and I can't recall details of the conversations we had, but it is absolutely true that this is what Drini stated.
That's what Drini stated. Okay. So Sokol Bashota is saying that the selection of Suleiman Salimi is that he wishes that this coup had not been planned by UDBA. Do you recall that comment?
Po.
Yes, I do.
Sula has been chosen because he can be manipulated very easily. Is that right?
Po, ashtu është, ashtu ka.
Yes, that's right. That's what he said.
Is it fair then to say that both Sokol Bashota and Drini were opposed to the appointment of Suleiman Salimi as the overall commander?
Faktisht po.
Yes, that's right.
After this meeting, Suleiman Salimi replaced Commander Drini as the commander of the Pashtric zone. Is that correct?
Po, më vonë.
Yes, later.
Do you know if Suleiman Salimi's motivation was in part driven by the fact that Drini had opposed his appointment as overall commander? Do you know?
Jo.
No, I don't.
If we scroll down a bit and we get to where Chiliku is speaking, if we go to the next page in Albanian, please. Chiliku is who?
Fatmir Lim.
Fatmir Limay.
Mr. Limay says the staff has achieved the maximum objectives for the internationalization of the Kosovo issue. Can you explain what you understood him to mean when he said that?
Po, me
What you meant to say is that the general staff, in its relations with the internationals, it has been to demonstrate the capabilities of the KLA. So the meaning is that through its own activities, so far, it has achieved what it has. That is the maximum of what it could have achieved and no more.
What did you understand him to mean by the internationalization?
tash mendimet e
I think the definition of this from different people is different. But what it meant in that context was to make the international community aware of what the KLA was able to do in its and had been able to do in its objective of securing the liberation of Kosovo.
Next page now, please. Now, witness, this is purporting to be a record of the discussion about who should be the prime minister. And if we look through these entries, it would appear that 5 people were for Mr. Thaçi. Of the 9 people here, 5 were for Mr. Thaçi, 2 were for Mr. Krasniqi, and 2 people were undecided, although you said you would go with the majority. Is that correct?
po, kam thënë si
Correct. I said I'd go with the majority.
Just looking at this, if only 5 of the 9 were in support of Mr. Thaçi. It wasn't obvious going into this meeting that Mr. Thaçi would be selected, was it?
Nuk ka qenë e përcaktuar, është
It may not have been obvious, but the fact that he had been put at the head of the delegation meant that it would have been Thaçi.
But, all right. Now, concerning when the provisional government eventually came to be established in April, do you know how often the provisional government as a government met?
jo, nuk kam pas mësi.
No, I don't. No, I wouldn't have been able to know that because during that time I was taking part in the Operation Arrow, and with the end of the war I went on to work in the Committee on Infrastructure, so I was not able to follow the frequency with which meetings of the government were held or otherwise.
Do you know if the provisional government as a government ever held a meeting?
Jo, nuk e di.
No, I don't.
Where the various members of the provisional government were physically located after the NATO bombing began? Were they all in Albania or all in Kosovo, or were some in both places?
Po në atë kohë nuk ishim në vend.
At the time, they weren't situated in the same place. They were all over the place. Some were in Kosovo, some were in Albania, others were overseas.
Turning your attention to the beginning of the NATO bombing campaign, you've testified that in November of 1998, you started the reorganization in an effort to make the KLA a more professional organization. My question to you is, what happened to the development of the KLA as an organization when the NATO bombing began and the Serb offensive in the spring was launched?
Po me fillimin e
When the NATO bombing and the Serb offensives began, our attempts to restructure the KLA could not have been carried out in the same way because of the intensity of the offensives throughout the territory. It made it impossible for us to have a compact system, and there was so a lot of impact on the command structure and the ability to exercise this command as a result of the offensives that were being carried out during this time.
Okay. And what about the ability of the general staff to communicate with the zone commanders? Was there any impact in the functioning of the communications between the general staff and the zone commanders?
Po,
Yes, there were difficulties in communications, regardless of the fact that we were in possession of satellite phones. However, in the course of an offensive, we often found ourselves unable to charge those phones, so the communications had to be curtailed and limited to urgent situations. But the situation remains that the communications were not what they used to be before. This system was heavily damaged as a result of the fierce attacks at the hands of the Serbian forces.
Units, did they all stay in Kosovo?
Varësisht prej situatave të
depending on their respective situations. But most of the units, yes, they remained in Kosovo and they were on strict duties to protect the civilian population.
The general staff, did they all stay in Kosovo until the end of the war?
jo, për arsye
No, because with the commencement of the talks in Rambouillet, part of the staff joined the provisional government, and part, because of the offensives, went to Albania, and part remained in Kosovo. In other words, as staff, it wasn't a compact structure during the time of the bombings in Kosovo.
Now, are you aware of the composition of the members of the provisional government?
jo të gjithë, një pjesë.
Not of all of them who were members, just some of them.
Aware that some of them were members of different political parties?
Po,
Yes.
And how many members of the provisional government did you actually see stay in Kosovo?
po antarët e qeverisë përkohshme
Members of the provisional government at the time, and I'm talking about April, those who were inside Kosovo were few in numbers.
Then, if I could please put on the screen exhibit P1401, please, at page 291 in both the English and the Albanian. And while that's coming up, witness, many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Albanians were in the process of being expelled from Kosovo at this time, correct?
Po, ashtu.
Yes, that's correct. Hundreds of thousands.
Impact, if any, did the departure or expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Albanians have on KLA unit structure?
Po, dhe debimi, dhe lëvizja,
The expulsion, the internal movement of the population had an impact on the units. Some of the units had to assist and deal with the civilian population. Therefore, some of the soldiers went to their families. In short, this also had an impact on the units of the KLA.
The screen, you see the house that I believe you identified in questioning by the prosecution as the house that was, I believe you used the word, the seat of the provisional government. Is that correct?
po,
Yes.
Provisional government hold any meetings in this house?
jo,
No, I didn't during this period.
Do you know who stayed in this house?
nuk më di sakt kush kanë qëndruar.
I cannot be exact on who stayed there. In the beginning, in November, I was there as well, but later on, who all remained there, I don't know.
Specifically referring to the time period of April and May, you're saying you don't know who stayed there?
Ja, ja.
No.
Turning your attention to something you told the SPO in 2019, and you were asked this question at Part 11, page 20 in the English, beginning at line 7. You were asked, quote, "So is my understanding correct then, the provisional government would provide political oversight?" Meaning political oversight over the KLA. And your answer is, according to the rules, it should have been like that, but I don't know to what extent they really were able to do it. My question to you is, why do you have doubts as to whether the provisional government actually could exercise oversight over the KLA?
Nuk është çështja vetëm dyshimit.
It's not just a matter of doubt, but the situation and the conditions at the time were such that the government could not have impact. It was difficult for the general staff to have impact on the units, let alone the provisional government, which was in its beginning. Because of the movements of our forces, the possibility to communicate with the units, which was scarce, it was impossible for the provisional government to have any impact on the units. And I'm speaking about April-May period, the time when I was inside Kosovo.
And then the next question asked you something even more specific. It says, beginning at line 13, or line 14, would Suleiman Salimi, as general commander, would he have reported to Hashim Thaçi since he was now prime minister? And your answer is, according to the rules, he should have, but I don't know whether he was able to. Can you explain why you don't know whether he was able to?
Për arsye se
Because the time we are talking about whether it was possible for him to report. When we met with Mr. Thaçi in April in Nerodime area, that is in Nerodime operational zone, I met with Mr. Thaçi then, but with Mr. Sulay, that meeting occurred later. I don't know whether he was able to report to him or not. I think he couldn't, even from the physical aspect in the territory of Kosovo. The period post Rambouillet, March, late April, I don't think he was able to report regularly.
You said that you resigned your position as chief of staff in April of 1999, correct?
po,
Yes,
And went to work as assistant minister in the Ministry of Defense. Is that correct?
po,
correct.
Now, the ministry was part of the provisional government and not a part of the KLA, correct?
që ashtu është.
Correct.
Appointed by the new overall commander, Mr. Cheku, correct?
Jo,
No, I couldn't.
Provisional government was not under his authority, correct?
po ashtu është.
Correct.
Testified to the SPO, and this is beginning at part 11, page 22, that the military aspects continued to remain within the KLA and under the control of the general commander, correct?
Po, ashtu është.
Correct.
SPO that, for example, when Fatmir Limay moved to the Ministry of Defense, he no longer was in control or in command of the military police because that remained under the command of the KLA. Is that correct?
Po, ashtu.
Yes, correct.
Correct that Sokol de Bruna continued to report to the overall commander of the KLA, Mr. Cheku, at this time.
Po, derisa nuk
Yes, until he joined the provisional government.
And turning to Operation Arrow, you were in charge of operations in Operation Arrow. Is that correct?
po, operacion.
Yes, of the operations.
PO at Part 7, beginning at page 8, that it was in January of 1999, after consultation and approval from Deputy Commander Bashota and the General Commander of the KLA, that you began to draw up the plans for Arrow. Is that correct?
Po,
Yes,
Arrow was being prepared months before the establishment of the provisional government.
po, esakt.
yes, correct.
Is it correct then that the plans for Arrow were not drawn up from any order by Hashim Thaçi as Prime Minister?
Po, esakt nuk.
Yes, that's correct. They were not drawn up by his orders.
The operational plan signed by Suleiman Salimi as General Commander.
Po,
Yes,
Now, there were 3 operational commands of Arrow, and how many of the commanders of these 3 operational commands did you appoint?
me to komandat operative.
the operational commands. I was not the only one involved in the appointments, but the staff as well. The commanders of Direction 1 and Direction 2 were appointed upon my proposals, which were approved by the General Staff. They were appointed. And as I said, their appointment was made based on my proposals and that of the General Commander.
That would be Commander Cheku, correct?
Jo.
No. This happened earlier by Suleiman Selimi.
So can you identify by name the 2 commanders that you had recommended and were appointed formally by the General Staff, by Commander Suleiman Salimi?
Po,
Yes. Operational Direction 1, Koshare Rasim Berisha, and the Operational Direction 2, Pashtrik Nejmedin Kastrati.
The commander of Operational Direction 3.
drejtimi 3
Number 3 was appointed by me, but it never became operational.
Let me show you some news articles and ask you what you know about them. If we could please have first 019775 to 019776 in the English, and DHT 04030 to DHT 04030AT in the Albanian. First, is it correct that Operation Arrow began on the 26th of May, 1998? $1999, excuse me.
Si operacion
As an operation, not on the 26th of May, but on the 9th of April in Koshare, Operational Direction 1, and the second operational direction, that of Pashtik, was on the 26th of May.
So the Pashtik direction, first let's look at this. This is a news article from the 27th of May reporting that Mr. Thaçi was in Paris meeting with the French foreign minister on that day. Were you aware, as Operation Arrow was proceeding, that Mr. Thaçi was not in Kosovo or Albania, but that he was in the West?
jo nuk isha.
No, I wasn't aware.
There are several articles that show between at least the 27th of May and at least the 3rd of June, Mr. Thaçi was in London, Bonn, and in Cologne. I suppose you weren't aware that he was outside of Kosovo and Albania on those days either. Is that correct?
Po ashtu është, nuk.
Correct, I wasn't.
The reason I ask you those questions, witness, is I'm interested in knowing about reporting. If Mr. Thaçi was not, just assume for the moment that Mr. Thaçi was in the countries I mentioned. So he's in France, he's in the United Kingdom, and he's in Germany. As the operation is ongoing, to whom is Nejmedin Kastrati reporting?
Nejmedin Kastrati raporton.
Nejmedin Kastrati reported to me as commander of the operations situated at the command in Kukës.
And then to whom are you reporting?
Ministrit mbrojtjes.
To the Minister of Defense.
And how is he, or who is reporting to Mr. Ceku?
Njëjtë ashtu edhe ne si
Same as us, a report would be also sent to the General Staff. One to the General Staff and one to the Ministry.
Do you know whether Mr. Ceku was reporting to Mr. Thaçi at all? Let me rephrase. Do you know whether Mr. Sula was reporting to Mr. Thaçi?
Jo, nuk e di.
No, I don't.
Now, I want to turn to a different document that was shown to you last week, and it concerns the 14 May National Guard document. If we could first, however, pull up the first 2 pages of that document, which were not shown to you, which is SPOE 00228180 to SPOE 00228181 in the English, please. Revised 2. It should be the same in the Albanian. I'm just going to note for you, witness, that I'm showing you the first 2 pages, and you can look at the fax line, which you can compare when I show you the rest of the document, but it appears to have been faxed at the same time as the page 3 and later that you were shown last week. Now, as you can see on the page, the document contains no protocol number. Is that correct?
Po saktë, nuk ka numër.
Yes, correct. There's no protocol number.
And if you look at the first page, it says that this proposal for a National Guard is following the proposal of the General Staff. So this would be a document on its face that would have been proposed by the General Staff. Is that correct?
Po,
Yes?
Well, let me ask you this. The fact that it doesn't have a protocol number, does that indicate anything to you as to whether this document was ever actually an official document?
për mua,
To me, if there's no protocol number, no signature, the document would not be valid and would not be effectuated.
Okay. Tender these two pages into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
Thank you. SPOE 00228180 to SPOE 00228181 in English, revised 2, and the Albanian translation are all admitted.
And we will be assigned exhibit number 1D00169, currently classified as confidential. Thank you, Honors.
I think it can be public.
Reclassified as public.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if we can go to exhibit P01434, please. Now, witness, this is what you were shown last week, and this is now what would be page 3 of the document. And this is what the National Guard units were supposed to look like. And I just want to ask you just a few questions to see how realistic this was in May of 1999. So, for example, if you look at just the first section alone, the Kosovo Liberation Army will have these units. For example, it says 10 Brigade of Field Artillery. How much field artillery did the KLA have in May of 1999?
asnjë hiç.
None.
Down a couple of lines, 80 Battalion of Defense Against Atomic, Chemical, and Biological Attack. What kind of capabilities did the KLA have in May of 1999 to defend against, for example, an atomic attack?
Zoti avokat, nuk ka
Mr. Counsel, it's not 80 battalions, but it's a name of a formation, 80th Battalion. So it's just one battalion, not 80 battalions, and that one battalion is called 80th Battalion. So this was impossible at the time, and there wasn't any. This structure that I see here was proposed by Mr. Ceku to be developed further with the KLA, but this structure could in fact be developed only after the war. During that time of the Serbian offensives in May 1999, this structure was impossible.
Yes, so I was just going to point out two more things. Cyber war, for example, and an Army Wind Orchestra. These are things that were not something you were thinking about in May of 1999, correct?
Jos pak.
Yes, correct. At the time, the concern was how to defend the population and the units and not to create a different structure. This structure requires a long time. It's been 10 years that we've been trying to create such a structure, and it's still not complete, let alone in one day. It's impossible.
Now, Suleiman Salimi was supposed to have been named commander of this National Guard. Suleiman Salimi was in Albania at the time. Are you aware of that?
Po, e di ato, jam taku.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I met with Mr. Suleiman Selimi in Albania.
And is it correct that he was, at this time, had been seriously injured in a car accident? Do you know?
Po, kam djoni.
Yes, I know he was.
Mr. President, I note the time, so we can take the break now.
We'll take a 10-minute break now, witness, as we have before. You may go leave the courtroom now with the court usher.
If I could just, at one point.
Yes, go ahead.
If we can go into private session for a minute, Mr. President.
Into private session, please, Madam Court Officer, or Mr. Court Officer, I'm sorry.
Your Honor, we're in public session. Thank you.
We're adjourned for 10 minutes.
All rise. All rise.
Be seated, please. Please bring the witness in. All right, Mr. Zarapi, we will continue now. Go ahead, Mr. Misitich.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Court Officer, if we could please have on the screen DHT 04009 to DHT 04017, ET at page 5. And in the Albanian, it's SPOE 000-53060 to 000-53071 at page SPOE 000-53068. And witness, this is a newspaper interview given by Agim Ceku to Zedi, and I just want to ask you whether your recollection is consistent with his about one point. And it should be page 5 in the English. Yes, on the bottom left, in the Albanian, Mr. Zarapi, there's a question that says, was the procedure for your election as Chief of the General Staff of the KLA done in Kosovo or earlier? And the last sentence there, he says, then we stayed at the General Staff for a few days, and my work was discussed for a long time, and the decision to appoint me Chief of the General Staff of the KLA was made by the entire General Staff, not by one person. Now, my question, Mr. Zarapi, is were you present at a General Staff meeting when Mr. Zarapi was, when Mr. Ceku, I apologize, was appointed Chief of the General Staff?
Yes, I was, because that was the time when I handed over that task to him as Chief of General Staff.
His appointment was made by the General Staff as a whole.
Yes.
Does not say that he was appointed by the provisional government. Is that consistent with your understanding?
That was a meeting of the General Staff where I handed over my duties, which he assumed.
Okay. Now, I just want to discuss for a moment concerning Mr. Ceku. Now, you've testified that it was Suleiman Salimi who signed the order for Operation Arrow, the first phase back in April. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then necessarily mean that Suleiman Salimi had the authority as the general commander to stop Operation Arrow if he wanted to. Was that your understanding?
Yes.
To the second phase at the end of May. Now Mr. Ceku is the overall commander of the General Staff. Did he have the authority to start and or stop Operation Arrow at that time?
Yes. That was my understanding at the time, and that is what should happen according to rules of the military.
Do you have an understanding of the nature of the relationship then between Mr. Ceku as the overall commander and Mr. Sula as the defense minister in terms of who was in command, who was in overall command of the operation, and how that relationship worked? Did you understand it at the time?
atë marrëdhënie shoqërore.
I wasn't aware of the relations that the two of them had between themselves because Mr. Cheko was inside Kosovo and Mr. Suda in Albania. They certainly had a professional relationship, and Mr. Cheko would have reported to Mr. Suda about events unfolding from within Kosovo. Otherwise, what the nature of their relationship was is not known to me.
Figure out, and I'm perhaps inferring something from your last answer, but were you, as the assistant minister, in charge of of the operation, and not Mr. Ceku, at least as to the direction, because you were in Albania? And did he command in Kosovo and Mr. Sula in Albania, or?
Në çka përket operacionit,
In respect of the operations or the operation in Albania, that was me leading it. I reported to the Ministry of Defense as per normal, and one copy would be sent to Mr. Ceku as well. I commanded the operations from within Albania, whilst in Kosovo it was Mr. Ceku who would report to the General Staff.
That's clear. Thank you. One question I wanted to ask you, and it concerns some of the maps we've seen about the zones of the various brigades. Is there a difference, for example, or can you explain where a brigade had its zone defined? Did that mean that the brigade was in complete control of the entire territory of its zone, or does it mean that the brigade is present in the zone, if you understand what I'm suggesting?
Ndarjen e zonave ose zonat brenda një zonës operative.
The delineation of operational zones meant that every brigade had its area of responsibility. And their responsibility was exercised as such in their quality as a brigade. There might have been other areas that might have had their area of responsibility. However, the zone of responsibility always meant that you had control over that zone, a control exercised by a relevant commander.
I didn't phrase my question well, so I apologize for that. My real question is, where you've defined a zone of responsibility of a brigade, did that mean that Serb forces had been, were now unable, or let me rephrase again, does that mean that the zone was now defended against Serb forces and therefore no Serb forces were present in the zone?
Mbarësisht zonat janë përcaktuar.
The zones were delineated on the basis of a map. However, this did not comply with the reality on the ground because not all the territory of Kosovo was under the control of the KRA. In Pristina, let's say, the territory was under the control of Brigade 125, but did it have control over all? No, it had control over the areas that it controlled, and in other parts there would have been Serb forces.
Turn your attention to the topic of Albania, and from April to June of 1999, you were based in Albania, correct?
Sakt.
Correct.
Bases that were being used for training in Albania, correct?
Po, sakt.
Yes, correct.
In Kukës?
baza Kuksit ka që nuk ka qenë.
The Cocos base was not a training base, it was a logistics.
SPO that while you were there, and this is at part 12, page 14, while you were there, you did not see any people being detained or any rooms being used for such purposes. Is that correct?
Po sakt.
That's correct.
Page 15, you said to the SPO that during your entire stay in Albania, you never heard of anyone being detained and arrested in Kukës. Is that correct?
Po sakt.
That's correct.
You told the SPO at part 12, page 15, that you did not know of any prisons in Albania. Is that correct?
Po, kështu është.
That's right.
And you also visited the base in Sahan. Is that correct?
Sakt.
Yes.
12, page 22, that you recall one case of a detainee in Sahan. Is that correct?
Po, ashtu është.
Yes, that's right.
And that person was someone named Tomor Buza. Is that correct?
Po, qartë.
Yes.
With Commander Plaku to urge him to release Tomor Buza. Is that correct?
Po, kam ndërhyrë dhe kam lejtë.
Yes, I intervened and he was released.
You do not recall any other occasions of detainees. Is that correct?
Po, ashtu është.
Yes, that's right.
If you had no knowledge of detainees, then is it correct that you couldn't have passed any information to Azim Sula or Mr. Thaçi about detainees?
Po sakt ashtu është.
Yes, that's right.
Now, I want to turn to a different topic, which is training. And this is going back to 1998 now. You told the SPO at part 14, page 2, that while you were still in Albania waiting to get approval to enter Kosovo in the spring of 1998, you led some trainings with soldiers. Is that correct?
Po, kështu është.
Yes, that's right.
Tactical trainings?
Po, këtu ishin stërvitjet e
It was training in the use of weaponry as well as of a tactical nature.
At part 14, page 4, that in January and February 1999, as part of your efforts to reorganize the KLA, you also organized trainings. Is that correct?
Po, kështu është.
Yes, that's right.
The SPO that in these trainings of battalion commanders, again, this is part 14, page 4, you say, quote, "We also used the brochures of the International Red Cross that explain how an officer and a soldier should act during war, what the rights are." Is that accurate?
Sakt.
Yes, correct.
And the idea was to train the battalion commanders who would in turn pass the knowledge on to their battalion soldiers. Is that correct?
Po, kështu është.
Yes, it's correct.
00631 on the screen, please. Now, witness, is this document that we see on the screen the order that you issued related to the training of battalion commanders?
Po.
Yes.
2, at paragraph 3, you said that the training was for battalion commanders because 80% of them did not have a proper military education. Is that correct?
Po, kështu është.
Yes.
You wanted to achieve with the training.
Me këtë tre
The objectives of the training was for the commanders to be able to lead their battalions, to have military knowledge of tactical movements and deployments, and to have basic knowledge in order for them to be able to command the battalion and maybe later on in time a brigade too.
Okay. And you told the SPO at part 14, page 4, that as part of this this training of battalion commanders, Sokol de Bruna also gave legal training, and all of this was part of the preparations for battalion commanders. Is that correct?
po saktë.
Yes, correct.
P01361 on the screen, please. Now, witness, or Mr. Zarapi, let me ask you, have you seen this document before? Can you recollect seeing it? And do you know if it was used by Mr. de Bruna in the training of battalion commanders?
Nuk kam i sigurt, po
I am not sure, but I know that De Bruna did lecture. Whether based on this document or not, I don't know. But a look at this document would suggest that, yes, he would have used it.
And you told the SPO at part 14, page 6 of your SPO interview, that Mr. de Bruna told you that he had prepared things like a criminal code and a criminal procedure code to govern procedures before the military court. Is that correct?
në atë kohë po më ka thonë që ka përgatitur.
He told me at the time that he had prepared a set of documents. However, I have not seen them.
And one more point on an answer you gave before the break this morning. Do you have any, you said that Sokol de Bruna was within the KLA and reporting to the general staff until he joined the provisional government of Kosovo. Do you have any reason to dispute Mr. de Bruna's assertion that he joined the provisional government in October of 1999?
Jo, nuk kam kundërshtime s'pa.
No, I wouldn't dispute it.
Turning to the issue of communiques, you told the SPO at part 5, page 7, that you don't know who was writing the communiques because they weren't your responsibility. Is that correct?
Po, kështu është.
Correct, yes.
turning to the KLA's relationship with the LDK. You told the SPO that when you joined the KLA in late May 1998 until September of 1998, you noticed that the local staff and the soldiers were predominantly from the LDK, and that's at part 3, page 31 of your SPO interview. Is that correct?
Po, sakt.
That's correct.
And during your time with the KLA, especially at the general staff level, would you say that the KLA and the general staff were open to welcoming former JNA professionals and former members of FARC into the KLA?
Po.
Yes.
List of KLA commanders and ask you whether they were former officers in the KLA. You can answer yes or no. Okay. Skender Hoja,
Po.
Yes.
Po.
Yes. Yes.
Gabim që emrin bjermi.
It may be a mistake in the name or surname. It's Mahir Hassani.
it's probably my fault. Thank you. Rifat Suleimani,
Po.
Yes.
Po.
Yes.
Oli,
Po.
Yes.
Po.
Yes. Yes.
Loku,
Po.
Yes.
Po.
Yes.
Chela,
Po.
Yes.
Treni,
Po.
Yes.
Husseini,
Po.
Yes.
Al Shachiri,
Po.
Yes.
Ahmeti,
Po.
Yes.
Oruchi,
Po.
Yes.
Agai,
Po.
Yes.
Pai,
Po.
Yes.
Bani.
Po.
Yes.
Former JNA officers who were admitted into the KLA and who I did not identify on this list?
Po ka.
There are.
For us by name?
Nureddin Ibishi,
Nureddin Ibishi, Kurtish Fandaj, Agim Kuchi, Nebi Krasniqi, and then Rustem Teta, Shamsuddin Teku, and
këta janë që kanë qenë nga fillimi.
these are the ones who served from the beginning to the end. There were others as well, but I cannot recall all the names at this point in time.
Do you recall any instance of a former officer of the JNA who was denied admission into the KLA?
Jo, asnjë.
No, not a single one.
How many former officers of the Army of Albania were admitted into the KLA?
Po, ka pas edhe oficer të Shqipërisë.
There were officers from Albania too. Yes.
Shpëtim Golemi ose
Shpëtim Golemi, aka Dilever Goxhaj, Bardyl Tahiri, Adem Shehu, these were the ones who served.
You may have made a slip of the tongue when you started the long list. You said, now I'm going to read you a list of KLA commanders and ask you whether they were former members of the KLA. I think you meant something different.
Yes, I've had a lot of slips of the tongue this morning. I apologize. But obviously, you understood that the question was former officers of the JNA. Is that correct?
Prvo oficer.
Officers.
But can you confirm for the record that you understood my question was whether they were former officers of the Yugoslav Army?
Unë për kthimin e pata mirë, pyet
I think the translation was fine. You asked me about former members of the JNA. That's how I understood it, and that's what I responded to. That's what I heard in the Albanian language, at least.
Thank you, witness. You told the SPO at part 10, page 30 of your SPO interview that your assessment was that 80% of the KLA belonged to the LDK. Is that correct?
po saktë.
That's correct.
Quote, I hadn't seen an issue with people having been against others who had been in the LDK or had a background in the LDK. I will give you another example. Rambuya was a member of the LDK. Is that correct?
Po kështu është.
Yes, that's right.
And Jakub Krasniqi was a member of the LDK, correct?
Po.
Yes.
Witness, let me stay on the topic of the LDK, and you were shown a document by the SPO allegedly issued by Gani Krasniqi regarding the LDK branch in Malyshev, and that is at, well, I don't have the citation, but you were asked that in your SPO interview. And you said you were not familiar with the document, but let's put the document on the screen, Mr. Court Officer. It's 1D6, please. Yes, and for the record, you discussed this in your SPO interview at part 3, page 34. Now, you recall seeing this document in your SPO interview?
Ndoshta po, po.
Maybe yes, however, not in detail. Yes, I have seen the document.
To the bottom, please, just so the witness can see the signature. You see it's signed by Gani Krasniqi?
Po.
Yes.
The SPO that this could not have come from the general staff. Is that correct?
Po kështu është.
That's right, yes.
This is a document issued by the municipality and not the general staff?
Po.
Yes.
Quote, I'd say that this is related to the political aspect of the local staff. Is that correct?
Po.
Yes.
Now, witness, my last topic with you is you said that you had received threats after the war, correct?
Po.
Yes.
Not know who was making the threats against you, but you believe it's related to the fact that you're a former officer of the JNA. Is that right?
Po.
Yes, that's right.
Now, you told the SPO that you did not raise security concerns with your security concerns with the TMK at the time. Is that correct?
Poštovošt.
Yes, that's right.
You said you did not raise your security concerns with former colleagues in the general staff who had become part of the provisional government. Is that correct?
To sagt.
Yes, correct.
And you told the SPO, and this is at part 11, page 13, that you didn't raise it with them despite the fact that they knew that you were not a collaborator but had in fact contributed significantly to the KLA during the war, correct?
Poštovošt.
Yes, correct.
You were asked by the SPO, and this is at part 11, page 13, about, and I'll just read the question and the answer to you. The question is, well, then let me ask you, what was the provisional government doing? I know they moved positions, but these were the people with whom you worked closely and who had power. Where were they? And your answer was, I don't know what sort of power they had. And I just ask you to explain why you question whether the members of the provisional government had the power to stop these threats against you.
Ono što je sagt,
It is true that this was a government that was being formed but had no authority, and the civilian structures were not built up at municipal levels and all other levels necessary for a provisional government to function. Secondly, although the KLA was undergoing the process of transformation, that is between June and September, work was being done towards its transformation during that period. As a government, it could not extend its authority. It needed to have its resources, to have its positions, to build the institutional line from top to bottom, from central to municipal government bodies, so that it could exercise authority at those levels. At the time, there was also KFOR, which had higher authority in terms of security in Kosovo, and that is why the government it was not able to have a full control over the entire territory of Kosovo.
Now, did you consider whether UNMIK had the authority to assist you, or the ability to assist you, I should say?
Në periudhën 99
In 1999, UNMIK II was undergoing the process of provisional administration forming. I cannot give my opinion on UNMIK because it's an international organization. It has its own sectors and rights. I don't know whether it would have been able or not, but as I said, this is how it was in 1999. And as far as provisional government is concerned, as I said, it would not have had at the time a full control.
Mr. Serapi, that concludes my cross-examination. Mr. President, there is one issue that I addressed prior to the last break, and given the time, if we could do it in private session, but outside the presence of the witness, and I don't know if Mr. Emerson wants to start in the last 10 minutes before the break, but
We will excuse the witness until 11:30, and you can start at, is that all right, Mr. Emerson, to start at 11:30? Witness, you will, that's all for this morning, or for this session, I mean, and you will have a break until 11:30. So you may leave the courtroom. And into private session, please, Mr. Court Officer.
Your Honor, we're in public session. Thank you.
Thank you. We are adjourned until 11:30, and then we will commence with the cross-examination by Vasily.
All rise. All rise.
Be seated, please. You may bring the witness in, Madam Usher. Mr. Emerson will have questions now on behalf of the Thaçi defense. Go ahead, Mr. Emerson.
Good morning, Mr. Zarapi. As you've heard, I'm going to put some questions to you on behalf of Kadri Vasili. And I want to start, if I may, by getting some basic dates clear with you of your own movements, and then looking in detail at the period between your arrival in Kosovo on, I believe, the 28th of May, and your departure from Kosovo when you left in the process of negotiating the FARC agreement. So that's the basic structure of the questions I want to begin with. So we know, because you've told us, I think, several times now, that your entry into Kosovo took a number of days, but that you arrived in the country on the 28th of May. Is that right?
Po?
Yes.
Correctly. You spend June, July, and August traveling around different pockets of KLA activity in different parts of the country, correct?
Sakt.
Correct.
Of distribution, capabilities, levels of skill, to what extent there are former trained JNA or Albanian army personnel, and so forth, and how to go about the process of making the forces more efficient on the ground.
Sakt.
Correct, yes.
And during the course of that process, obviously you were aware that of the difficulties that had occurred in the Dukajin region between Tahir Zimai and Ramesh Haradinaj, that as they occurred over that summer. But can I ask you when, as far as you can recall, you left Kosovo for the purpose of negotiating an agreement with the Bukoshi government?
Në shtator, fillim shtatorit.
At the beginning of September.
And you returned, is that correct, in early November?
Mesit nëntorit.
Mid-November.
Do you agree that the process of restructuring or reallocating general staff roles was completed on the 12th of November?
Jo, aty ka fill.
No, that's when it started.
And can you help us when it crystallized?
Procesi nuk përfundoi as.
It was a process that was never completed. We started it on the 12th of November and did what we could during November, December, January, February in terms of organization. However, the process was never completed as such.
I think it may be that I wasn't clear enough in my question. The process of allocating tasks within the general staff itself, to different individuals, is that the process that you say began on the 12th or was completed on the 12th? Which is it?
Io,
It started on the 12th. A number of people were given tasks within the general staff, and it's a process that continued onward.
And prior to that, the only person identified publicly at a much earlier stage in June, I think the 10th and 11th of June, was Jakub Krasniqi as spokesperson, correct?
Posakt.
That's correct.
And so you mentioned some of the negotiations that led to the FARC KLA agreement had taken place in Istanbul. Is that right?
Sakt.
Yes, that is correct.
An idea of the other locations where these meetings specifically towards that agreement took place? Clearly, Tirana was one.
Posakt Tirana.
Yes, Tirana, yes.
Any other country, apart from Albania and Turkey?
Memojo, nuk e di.
I don't know. I wasn't involved. I'm aware of these two.
And whilst these negotiations were taking place, you were with Mr. Vasili, correct?
Posakt.
That's correct, yes.
That these negotiations were taking place.
Posakt.
Yes, that's right.
Outside Kosovo with you throughout September and October.
Po, me mu ka qenë.
Yes, we were together in this process of negotiations as and when they started.
I want to read to you a passage from your interviews with the SPO. It's part 14, page 41, lines 8 to 22 in the English, and part 14, page 37, line 14 and onwards in the Albanian. I'm going to read it to you because I think it's a short enough passage simply to have it translated to the interpreters. If you'd like me to put it up on the screen or to read it again, let me know. Question. Also, yeah, you mentioned the ZKZ a few times before, and you said that the ZKZ was one of the most important directorates from a military perspective. During the summer of 1998, who was in charge with the intelligence, counterintelligence? To which you replied, I don't know. There is no information about what level of structure was at that time. Question, but just a question, was Mr. Vasili already in charge, or do you know when Mr. Vasili was put in charge with intelligence, counterintelligence? And you reply, I know that from November on, he was in charge of the intelligence. Before that, I don't know. I didn't know the structure, or I hadn't seen a structure before that point, so I don't know if he was previously or not. Now, it was you, wasn't it, who made the decision that Mr. Vasili should be appointed to intelligence and sent to Albania for training in November. You made that decision as Chief of Staff.
Po.
Yeah. Yes, I made the decision for him to be sent to training.
Decision a little bit later. But since you'd spent September and October out of the country with Mr. Vasili, and since you told the SBO you had no knowledge of his involvement as head of intelligence over the summer, can we take it that you have, or had at the time, let us say in November, no reason to believe that he was the head of a structure within the KLA that reached to the level of the General Staff?
Për atë kohë e di që ka qenë
What I know is that he was at the General Staff. At the time, that is, what his responsibilities were, I don't know. What I'm referring to is this period, the period where the restructuring began, and that task was given to him.
So what you're referring to the period in November and onwards in the course of the restructuring, but prior to that you just spent 2 months with him negotiating the FARC agreement outside the country, is that right?
Po.
Yes.
Believe that he was receiving intelligence reports from inside the country or giving instructions to any intelligence officials inside the country, in Kosovo, whilst he was with you negotiating the FARC agreement?
Po, në atë kohë na ishim
At the time, we were outside the country dealing with the issues of the negotiations of the agreement, whilst the intelligence services during that period were underdeveloped. So there might have been a structure in place that reported upwards to the General Staff. However, this reporting would have been difficult owing to the offensives occurring during the summer. Additionally, though, these were structures that were underdeveloped.
You were out of the country. Did you I think you told us last week that you were not placing calls to those who were in the country or receiving calls from them. Is that correct?
Po, kështu është.
Correct, yes.
Sepse komandanti i përgjithshëm
We had the General Commander alongside us, and we could discuss with him anything that was related to the work that we'd been entrusted with could be discussed there and then.
And you told us, in answer to questions from Mr. Misetic, that the restructuring that started, the process began in November, was in part because of a result of liaison with other states, including NATO states. Is that correct?
Bën edhe një pyetje se nuk e kuptoj.
Can you kindly ask the question again? I'm not sure I understood it correctly.
You answered Mr. Misetic, and this is 17628 lines 10 to 20 for those following, that the reorganization started in the context of discussions with external partners, in other words, other countries, partly as a result of information being passed back to the KLA General Staff. Is that right?
Po, sakt.
Yes, that's right.
Organisation, structures which the governments of NATO member states would be able to support as a credible military force. Is that correct?
Po, sakt.
Yes, correct.
One of those conducting those discussions at the intelligence level was Mr. Vasily, correct?
Po.
Yes.
And his liaison would often be with intelligence officials associated with the embassies of NATO member states. Is that correct?
Kontaktet i kanë pas të jashtë, po
They had contact with these outside forces. However, who with or how frequent they were, I don't know.
But that was, we know, at a time when, according to you, am I right? And I'm going from what you've said in your interviews, Mr. Vasily had no kind of formal intelligence training, correct?
po sakt.
Yes, correct.
So that after it was decided, I suggest on the 12th of November, that he would take responsibility for intelligence, you made the decision he needed to go and train initially with the Albanian intelligence service to understand how to run an intelligence service. Is that correct?
Po sakt.
That's correct.
There's the term G2 came to be used to describe that function. G2 being a term used in conventional NATO military forces, correct? Do you know whether that was as a result of interface with NATO forces through Mr. Vasily, that process of communication was put on foot?
Po, në përgjithësi edhe për ato,
Yes, generally speaking, yes.
Beginning, when you are moving around the territory and observing what is happening on the ground in these, you told us, relatively disorganized pockets, as they were in the end of May and June and July. Can we please turn to P606 at page 3, which, if I've got this right, should be an exhibit you've already been shown part of by the prosecution during your testimony. It's the Zeri interview and its English translation. This was an interview with you in, do you have a specific date for publication? 98? Yes, it's towards the end of November 1999. Oh, we have it right on the top of the page. There we go. Can I just focus on the the first question in solid text, did these units, if we can just zoom in on that. So you were taken to a latter passage in this interview, but I just want to go through what you said more generally about organisation and see if you can confirm that this is what you encountered during that initial June, July, August period. Did these units which were operating at that time in some regions of Kosovo have links between the chain of command among themselves before your joining the war? So this is effectively asking you what you encountered when you entered Kosovo. And you reply, as I also said above, there was military responsibility, but there was not a structured command. In terms of a vertical chain of command, where the lower headquarters is forced to respect the orders of the higher headquarters, willy-nilly. And so I can say that there was not comprehensive command and control from one single place or headquarters. I will now turn to the tasks I received from the General Staff for the inspection of the front lines. After this check of the front lines, which I made, I returned to the base and reported my findings to Hashim Thaçi, Kadri Vasili and Sokol Bashota. Now, is it right that your findings included the fact that in some areas and some brigades and some zones, an individual had been appointed locally with intelligence, counterintelligence responsibilities, but without any framework beyond the brigade commander or the zone commander?
Yes, that's exactly what I stated. However, this refers to the period June-July. During that time, there were no superior officers appointed for the task of intelligence and counterintelligence at these units or levels. With the formation of the brigades and other units, this became more normal. However, during that time, there was no organized system at the unit or command level to do that job. Maybe somebody did carry out those tasks, but that was not part and parcel of a structure that I inspected and could conclude about at that time.
Will you please call up P1386, again an exhibit we've seen. Which I'm going to suggest to you as an example of what you've just described from the end of July. And this English translation. So you remember looking at this last week. This is, you confirmed, an order signed by Ramesh Haradinaj at the very end of July, 30th of July, appointing, it seems from the first time, Fatun Mehmetai as the intelligence service officer for the Dukajin zone, or sub-zone as it was called in that period. That wasn't an appointment made by the General Staff, was it? It was an appointment made by Ramesh Haradinaj.
Sucked.
And from your...
That's right.
Last part. Did I miss something? No. insofar as people were being appointed to those kinds of roles in the various subzones and pockets of activity at around this time, towards the end of July, they were not being appointed by the General Staff or answerable to the General Staff. Is that correct?
Ashtu është.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned amongst the list of former JNA officers that you confirmed this morning in answer to the questions put to you by Mr. Masecic, the long list of JN officers, that one such officer was Kurtesh Fondai.
Sakt.
That's correct.
Or do you know, I should say, that Kurtesh Fondai gave evidence openly without any protective measures in this courtroom a couple of weeks ago? Did you know that?
Kam dëgjuar.
I heard about it.
He gave us some testimony about this, about the appointment and responsibility of intelligence officials in the zones and brigades at the time that he was responsible, and indeed when he was brigade commander and thereafter. And I'm just going to, perhaps we can, it might be easiest if it's possible for us to pull it up. It's 17096, so it's the 25th of June, 17096, line 7. And again, I'm going to read this to you. I don't think we yet have the Albanian translation of the transcript for that period. I see we don't. So I will read it to you in the English, and it will be translated for you. And I want you to listen to what he says, and then comment on whether you consider it to be an accurate reflection, or any additional comment that you may have. I can't hear what it says. I see. I'm sorry. Because the specific page of transcript is not on the queue, it can't be called up automatically. My mistake. Well, then, in which case, let me read it for you in the same way I did the last passage. Question: was that the general pattern then, that the brigade commanders would decide who locally would be on their own command responsible for intelligence, as you did? He having, Kurtesh Fondai having testified that he appointed his own intelligence official. So I'll read the question again. Was that the general pattern then, that the brigade commanders would decide who locally would be on their own command responsible for intelligence, as you did? Answer: not only for the counterintelligence, but all resources. The brigade commander is the authority who selects his team. He would only ask for a confirmation from the higher structures for this selected team. When I mentioned yesterday my case, I had full authority to select people without any further confirmation needed, because the circumstances were such that we didn't need these admin following administrative steps in war circumstances. Question: so these were not people that had been chosen by the general staff in the different brigades. They hadn't been selected by the general staff. Is that correct? Answer: at least during my time as a brigade commander, I formed the team. I don't know how this worked in other brigades, but in principle it should have been the same. He's referring, he says here, to the period December and January, December 98 and January 1999. He says, I assisted both Brigade 122 and 124 the appointment of the staff command there was done upon consent of the brigade commander without any higher structure interference or commanding structure at a higher level. Question: and since that was the pattern, who would give orders, for example, in your brigade? Who would your ZKZ representative take orders from? Answer: from the brigade commander. Question: thank you. And that remained the position at least until January, you would say? Is that correct? Answer: that is how I proceeded, and I am convinced that this is how it continued further. Thank you. Question: and just to avoid any doubts on the transcript, that is your comment on the general pattern within your zone, correct? Answer: correct. And in the period of time I was brigade commander, this was the pattern, how we acted. In other periods of time, I would refer to practices because I do not have information how this unfolded. Now, pausing there for a moment, you obviously had a much broader picture right across the forces that you had inspected in the period June, July, and August. Is the description that Kurtish Fondi gave there typical of what was going on as intelligence units were appointed, or intelligence officials were appointed?
Yes, it's correct, just like he described it, not only for the ZKZ, but also for the other structures within the zone commands.
Appointed either by the brigade commander or at zone level, as we saw in Ramesh Haradinai's case, by the zone commander, and they would take instructions from the zone commander or the brigade commander and report to them. Is that correct?
I need to explain this a bit. In a brigade, the intelligence officers would report to the brigade commander and would receive orders from the brigade commander. At zone level, from zone commanders. This is how it was at the time and how it should be based on military rules.
And was there a difference then in that early period? Just if you could, because of course Kurtish Fondi's testimony relates to December, January, at the early stages of the reorganisation. Can you just in your own words characterise for the judges what you encountered as you travelled round in June, July and August? I mean, did you come to be aware about intelligence official or intelligence individuals being appointed to an intelligence role as with Phaeton Memetai, or was that a rarity? Just give the judges a sense of what it was that you encountered over that three-month inspection in relation to intelligence, ZKZ at the local level.
Well, not only with ZKZ, but with other sectors as well. In this period, before the brigades were formed, the senior officers at these headquarters or levels were appointed by the commanders of lower units. So there was no such appointment structure at this period of time. There was no officer for intelligence or counterintelligence. At least when I inspected, I was not introduced to such officers. However, with the formation of the brigades, these sectors were also created and such intelligence officers were appointed. They were put to such position by the brigade commanders. They were proposed and appointed by them with the approval of the zone commanders. And at zone level, they were appointed by zone commanders. This had nothing to do with us at the General Staff because we were not familiar with the officers in the respective zones, and the commanders there actually had that knowledge and did the appointments as per their capabilities. What we could do was to train them to the extent we could and was possible so that they could give their best in that field.
We're speaking about a training process that began at the beginning of 1999, is that correct?
Procesi po, in training.
The training process, yes.
As regards the training process, that was the sort of general military training process that we've heard a fair bit about.
Po saktë.
The academy
Yes, correct.
Reja was one of the teachers, is that correct?
Po.
Yes, and many others.
Bashota.
Po, sigurisht.
Yes, including Sokol Bashota, myself, and other officers.
I want to ask you then about another earlier passage in your interviews with the SPO here. It's from part 5, page 22, line 10. This is for those following in the English, and page 24, line 12 in the Albanian. It's a short series of questions and answers. You were asked this. Okay, then we have just one more question. You mentioned special unit military police. What about intelligence? Did you have an intelligence sector? Answer, yes. The intelligence sector was just established, known as G2, and the head of this department was Kadri Vasili. However, when he was appointed to this position, he was abroad for about 1 month to train, correct? Sorry, do you remember saying that, is how I should put the question?
Po.
Yes, when I mentioned that he went for training abroad.
Come back to the timing and evidence of his movements, but what you told the SPO very clearly was that the intelligence sector was just established and known as G2 at the time Kadri Vasili was appointed. And that was November, correct?
Po.
Yes.
Of your testimony that I'm going to ask you to clarify, if I can, please. When you were asked by counsel for the prosecution last week about the directorates that existed at the time of the restructuring, and based on your proofing note, which was shown to you, you indicated that those that were in existence at the time were information, operations, finance, intelligence, and logistics. Now, can you tell us how we should understand that in view of the fact that you've said that the intelligence sector was established as at the time of Mr. Vasili's appointment, the intelligence sector at the general staff level.
Po.
Yes. When I said this, I explained how, and when we speak about the directorate, it was called Information Directorate. It wasn't called Directorate of Intelligence and Counterintelligence. I don't know what its duties and tasks were because it was from before. However, as an intelligence sector, it started to be formed in November 1998 with the restructuring of the general staff, and that's when Mr. Kadri Veseli was appointed.
And up until that point, if I've understood your evidence correctly, we have 3 months of chaotic organisation on the ground with no coordinated intelligence operating on the ground at all, correct? And certainly not reporting to the general staff. This is June, July, August.
Sakt, jo veç
Correct. Not only this sector, but it was the same situation with other sectors as well.
Months where you're outside Kosovo with Mr. Vasili negotiating a merger between the two, the Koshi side and KLA side, into one fighting force, correct? Followed by the return to Kosovo and reorganisation process beginning, at which point you send Mr. Vasili out of the country almost immediately, initially to train, but thereafter, as we shall see, other roles became relevant as well, but to train with the Albanian intelligence service initially. Is that a fair summary?
po, ashtu.
Yes, it is.
Now, I want, if I may, to take you to some documentary material, some stamps in Mr. Vasili's passport, which has been supplied to us and to the court by the Swiss authorities and is already an exhibit. And, Your Honours, may I say there's a better, cleaner copy that's now been supplied by the Swiss authorities where you can see some of the stamps in colour a little more clearly. So we would like, if we may, to substitute the cleaner pages which are on our queue for the current exhibit, which the current exhibit is DKV 1232, and we would either like to add or substitute DKV 0814.
Any objection to that substitution?
Provided it's the exact same page range. I can't see them at the moment, but we'll go inter partes if there's an issue.
We'll just mark it for identification now, and she can get a chance to look at it, and then we'll...
They are on our queue, so it's been disclosed for some time. If we can...
Just a second. Could you give me an answer after the lunch break?
Yes.
Thank you. Rather than mark it MFI at this time, Mr. Emerson, just re-offer it after lunch. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if we can start with the page range DKV 1217 to 1234 revised. And what I'm going to do is return to that exhibit at a number of points in this chronology. But the first point is DKV 1232. Now, if we look at the top right-hand stamp, that is an exit stamp from Rinos Airport in Albania. So it's the 10th of September, at the time that you had been outside Kosovo with Mr. Vasili, and we don't have a corresponding entry stamp, because not all of the stamps are there, but an outbound flight from Albania. Do you remember whether that date coincides with one of the trips you took together, for example, to Istanbul?
Jo, 10 shtator.
No, it's not the 10th of September that correlates to our trip to Istanbul. We went to Istanbul in October. This is a totally different date. Maybe another trip to somewhere else where he went.
But in September, were the negotiations you told us for the FARC agreement already underway?
Bisedime pak kemi bërë se nuk kam.
We did some negotiations, but I didn't stay long in September. I left for abroad. I don't know how they unfolded during my absence. And upon my return, we continued the negotiations towards the agreement that I mentioned earlier.
Mr. Vasili was in Tirana, correct?
Po.
Yes.
You can see that he obviously left Tirana for another country in mid-September, but you don't know exactly where that was.
Po, sakt nuk e di.
Correct. I don't know where he went.
Now, if we look over to, again, see if you can help us with this. If you look over to, I'm sorry, if it can be called up DKV 1221. So this is 11th of October, and it is a departure stamp from Zurich by plane. Does that ring any bells for you at that point, 11th of October? Can you help with where you were at that point?
Në këtë moment kam qenë.
At that point, I was also abroad in the West.
The meeting in Istanbul, I think you said, was at the beginning of October, is that right?
Ja, nuk e thash fillim tetor.
No, I didn't say beginning of October. I said October, but it was later, after this date.
And then, if we can see 1233, please, page 1233. At the bottom right-hand side of the page, we have an arrival stamp into Rinas on the 11th. So whether it was an indirect flight or just either side of midnight, this seems to be a flight from Zurich in Switzerland entering into Albania on the 11th of October. Does that doesn't help you in any way
Jo, fare.
It doesn't at all. I wasn't there at the time.
Then, please, we know that the FARC agreement was concluded on the 31st of October, but officially issued on the 3rd of November, correct?
Po, zyrtarisht ka
Yes, officially it was signed on the 2nd of November.
The 2nd, thank you very much. Now, the next relevant passport stamp is at DKV 1233 as well, and it's the 19th. Give me one moment. I'm sorry, it's at 1224. No, I do apologise, it's the wrong one. Yes, the one we need to turn to is at 1233. I'm sorry, DKV 1233. And if we look at the top right, so the left-hand page, first of all, and the stamp on the top right of the right-hand column is a 19th of November 1998 stamp from Rinas Airport in Albania. Now, again, you said you had appointed Mr. Vasili to G2 in November and then dispatched him for training with the Albanian intelligence shortly thereafter. This date, this transit out of Rinas would be after you'd sent him to Albania to train with the Albanian intelligence. Is that right?
sakt.
Yes, that's right.
And then if we go to DKV 1222, there is a renewal of a refugee visa in Bern on the 11th of December. You see that one? On the left-hand page, that is
Po e shoh.
Yes, I see.
He's in Bern on the 11th of December. And if we then turn to $12.33, involves some jumping about the document, I'm afraid, Mr. Zarapi, because obviously the date stamps aren't put in neatly and chronologically. But the second stamp down on the right, so the left-hand page, right-hand column of the left-hand page, the second stamp down is, we've seen that there were certain celebrations and so forth going on in Kosovo over the new year, but this is a stamp for the 31st of December, arriving in Rinas Airport, Albania. You can see that one.
Po.
Yes.
And then on the 5th of January, can we please look at 1224, please, page 1224. Again, on the left-hand page, the lowermost visible stamp on the right-hand column, the second stamp, the one at the bottom, it shows an arrival by plane on the 5th of January in Brussels, and then a departure from Brussels on the 10th of January. So that takes us is the stamp immediately above it. Then, if from there, I think. Would you just give me a moment? Can we go back to 1223, please? Yes, and on the right-hand page is a Slovenian stamp indicating that on the 13th of January, Mr. Vasili arrived by car in Slovenia. And you can see that.
Po?
Yes.
Should we now, we'll have to come back to this document in a moment or two, but could we now call up 11491 to, sorry, 111491 to 111682 ET at pages 111558 to 111559. And whilst that is being brought up, Mr. Zarapi, it is a document
Your Honors, we're in public session. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'll repeat my question. Are you aware that Mr. Vasili attended Rambouillet, first of all, the first Rambouillet conference between the 6th and the 23rd of February?
Po.
Yes.
Are you aware that he did not travel from Kosovo? He wasn't part of the delegation traveling from Kosovo?
Po, sakt.
Yes, that's correct.
We've heard evidence from Sean Burns, the head of US KDOM. You mentioned him in another context last week. He accompanied the delegation that flew from Kosovo to Rambouillet, didn't he? Or do you not know that?
Po, është një...
Yes, there was a trip from Kosovo to Rambouillet, well, it was the return trip from Rambouillet after the 26th of February. So I am aware of this delegation that went from Kosovo to Rambouillet.
Sean Burns has testified to us in this trial that it was the outward journey, at least, that he travelled upon, and that Kadri Vasili was not amongst those who went to Rambouillet from Kosovo. And I see you nodding. You can confirm that, or you are just nodding because it's what I'm putting to you?
Sakt është. Nuk...
And it's correct, he wasn't.
I want, if I may, then to turn just to one issue that arises in your proofing notes that I wanted to get some clarification on. Just give me one moment. Just give me one moment while I... Yes, could we turn to the second preparation note, which is not in evidence, but is a call-up at 121825 to 121869 at page 26 in the schedule. I think it's, in terms of the call-up number, I think, the actual page number, I think it should be at 121857. Sorry. Sorry. Just to be clear, it's the annex to that document, and the page reference should be the... Yes, there we go. It's entry number 113. Now, you're being shown a list of handwritten notes from meetings that took place in January and February, and in fact, you've been taken to some of those in your testimony. And there's no reference, I'm sure this is uncontentious, there's no reference to Kadri Vasili in any of those notes. But you indicate the subject matter of some of the conversations and note that you attended some of those meetings. You then go on to say, during this time, Kadri Vasili stayed in Kosovo for a day or two before joining the delegation. Pausing there, that's the Rambouillet delegation, the first round of the Rambouillet talks you're referring to.
Po.
Yes.
Introduced Kasumi, that's Mensur Kasumi, correct, before he left for Rambouillet. And then you say you don't remember whether Mr. Vasili attended any of those meetings or not. But in other words, in your recollection, those meetings happened at a time when he was inside Kosovo for a day or two at the end of January or the beginning of February. Is that correctly understood?
Kështu është, nuk ka pas tek.
Yes, there were no meetings at the time, with the exception of that meeting during which he brought Mensur Kasumi.
With that, I do apologise. Yes, yes. We'll come back to the issue of Mensur Kasumi probably after the lunch, the German lunch break now. But could you just help me with one issue of translation and Albanian language? And I want you to indicate whether there is a very similar sound between two different words. And the first word is deputy, and the second word is successor or replacement. Now, are those two words very, very similar to the ear in Albanian?
Kur i ndëgjojsh po, por
Only when you hear them, however, they differ in the actions that they obtain. Zëvendës means a deputy, a demented commander, director, and so on and so on. Whilst the other word, zëvendësues, defines a person who would replace or take the role of a commander, a director, a section chief, somebody who acts up in the job of a section chief or a commander or director up until the moment when the said section chief, director, or commander returns to the post.
Deputy, one is a replacement, but they sound similar to the ear, correct? Can I...
Taking yes to answer.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. The witness
po,
nodded.
po, yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Can I turn now to... Just bear with me a moment. Can we call up GKV 1243 to 1250 ET alongside DKV 1243 to 1251? Now, on the left, obviously, you have the Albanian, and on the right, the English translation of a witness statement, sworn witness statement, that Mr. Kasumi has provided to the defence. And if we can please, in the Albanian, go to DKV 1251, the final page, and where the document is signed by Mensah Kasumi. Do you by any chance recognise Mensah Kasumi's signature?
No.
No, I don't. I never had an occasion.
Ask you about how Mensah Kasumi came into the General Staff, because he had previously been the Deputy Zone Commander in the Shala Zone. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You mentioned something about how he had been moved to the General Staff in connection with his health at one point. Can you remember the circumstances about how it was that Mensah Kasumi first came to the General Staff?
Yes, I remember it correctly. He had health issues, and because of his needs, he was transferred from the Shala Zone to the staff, and taking on board his previous experience, and I was aware of his contribution during the Bosnian War. He was part of the reconnaissance unit there. He had therefore this experience with issues of counterintelligence. However, because of his health issues, he was transferred to the staff headquarters, initially to serve under G2 and later with the intelligence and counterintelligence.
To be clear, had he been a police officer before the war at some point?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, yes.
Turn to paragraph 5, which is DKV 1245 in the English and DKV 1245 in the Albanian as well. This is paragraph 5. And I think we need to go the previous page in the Albanian. So I just want to go through 3 or 4 paragraphs from this statement and see if it accords with your recollection. In January 1999, I understood there was a call for trained officers to travel to Divjak, Kosovo, and become part of the General Staff. I was one of the most experienced officers in Kosovo, and I was happy to go and help the war if my skills could be better used as part of the General Staff. I could easily have refused. There was no one that would have reprimanded me or punished me. I could have just kept fighting in the Shala Zone, but we were colleagues and the proposal made sense to me, so I travelled to Divjak. In Divjak, I became in charge of the Directorate of Operations for the KLA. I took this position. I'm sorry, it hasn't kept up. We're now on paragraph 6. I do apologise. Pardon? Both documents. So paragraph 6. In Divjak, I became in charge of the Directorate of Operations for the KLA. I took this position up in February, but you have to understand that much of the month was spent trying to prepare for the outcome of Rambouillet negotiations. When asked about Mr. Vasili, I remember that he was not present in Kosovo until some time after Rambouillet. Paragraph 7. After the collapse of the Rambouillet conference, we knew that it was likely that NATO would intervene, and much of my job as Chief of Operations was to try and get a system in place to identify targets for NATO airplanes. This involved trying to create reliable communications systems with zone commanders on the ground so that they could report the movement of Serbian troops. I would then relay the information to NATO sources so that they would know where to hit legitimate targets. This may sound straightforward, but it was incredibly difficult. We simply didn't have the communication systems even for this critical task. In the entire Shala zone, there was one satellite phone. Trying to get consistent, accurate, actionable information from each part of Kosovo was impossible, but we did the very best we could. And then paragraph 9, after Rambouillet and the formation of the provisional government, my role continued as Chief of the Operations Directorate, but in the first week of April, I also became Chief of Military Intelligence, or ZKZ. And he has been shown, he says, an order which we have in our evidence dated the 4th of May, in which he signs in that capacity. He then comments, I have to say that in reality, this position in ZKZ at that time was mostly fictional. There was absolutely no intelligence structure within Kosovo at the time, and the idea that we could run counterintelligence was laughable. Try to understand that I could barely communicate with zone commanders in order to determine the location of Serbian forces who were burning down our villages and displacing the civilian population so that I could call in a NATO airstrike. On the scale of our priorities within the General Staff, relaying military targets to NATO was by far...
Objection, Your Honour. Are we going to have a question?
Yes, a number of questions, indeed.
Well, then I'd
Please.
say compound.
Please
But,
finish the statement, but
well,
we need to have questions, not just
absolutely,
statements.
absolutely. I think I was very new there, but I've now lost my place. Just give me a moment. I'll just finish briefly. Intelligence beyond the very basic, what is the physical location of enemy units, police and paramilitaries trying to burn our homes and kill our families, didn't exist on the General Staff level. It simply didn't exist. So to answer the question of whether I was Chief of ZKZ from 2nd of April, after the formation...
Objection, Your Honour. I believe you already ruled on this.
I'm sorry, I thought you should finish the statement.
It's going on quite long. I think it's quite
Very
obvious.
well,
It's
very
quite
well.
obvious what you've stated. Maybe you could ask him if he agrees.
There's a number of aspects to it, but yes, let me do it that way. First of all, Mensa Kasumi's recollection, as you can see, is that he joined the General Staff in the capacity of the Operations Directorate and remained in that capacity but took on an extra function of ZKZ following the formation of the provisional government. Now, is that possibly right? Or are you sure that he was introduced and took over an intelligence role immediately?
Yes, with his transfer to the General Staff, yes, he was sent to the Operations Directorate, because of his experience. At that point in time, it is clear here that he was appointed to replace Mr. Vasily in the information gathering, and later as a counterintelligence officer within the general staff, pending the return of Mr. Vasily. So this is a task that he performed. The way he explains the situation after the bombing started, he makes it quite clear that he returned to the intelligence office and continued to gather information that were required by NATO and the staff. I do remember him carrying out these tasks.
It's very helpful. Could it be, therefore, that he was, as I suggested earlier to you, the replacement for Mr. Vasily when the provisional government was set up in April, not his deputy? Prior to the time of his movement to, prior to the establishment of the provisional government, his function was in Directorate of Operations.
If he was not a member of SHIK, and let's be clear that SHIK was set up after the establishment of the provisional government. The period we're referring to is January and February, when we were talking about intelligence and counterintelligence, and when there was no provisional government. So the reference is to this sector, the sector of intelligence and counterintelligence. He was part of the operations directorate. It was a directorate that was did not have any staff, and he was given the task to carry out those duties until the return of Mr. Vasily.
It's time for our lunch break, if this is convenient at this point. We'll break for lunch now for an hour and a half. We'll be back and reconvene at 2:30. Remember not to speak to anyone about your testimony outside the courtroom. You may leave the courtroom now with the usher. We're adjourned until 2:30.
All rise. All rise.
Please be seated. Thank you for all being here. Sorry about the delay, but it couldn't be helped. Please take us into private session, Mr. Court Officer.
Your Honor, we are back in public session. Thank you.
We are adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
All rise.